Welcome back to another 10 under 10 GPP podcast where I tell you my 10 favorite plays, all projecting under 10% owned as of this recording. And it's brought to you by the fine folks at DFS Army, Kevin, Uppers Lad, all the boys over there, myself included. You can find us chatting it up in the Discord. People are watching the Steelers and Browns right this second as I record and chopping it up. And hopefully someone's going to take down a showdown tonight. My boy Bobby Wow did the notes. So you know they are going to be fire because he crushes every single week. So you guys know the drill here by now. We were in week 12. Oh, I just plugged this picture of my boy Tommy DeVito in terribly. It's all off to the side. I don't know why, but we got the week 12 main slate, 10 under 10. You know the drill. First to last, I ain't here to min cash. 5 players from Draftkings, 5 players from Fanduel. And, you know, guys who are projecting to be under 10% owned. All right. It's hard to do every week. We are going to hit some duds, as you know, but last week was okay. You know, we had Elijah Moore as the wide receiver 12. We had Anthony Richardson as the QB 5. Will Disley catching that early touchdown pass, but then look at this. Woof, double woof. Ricky Pierce, Deontay Johnson coming up with a couple of zeros. Right. And, you know, I talked a little bit in the article. This is free, by the way. You get it every single week for free at DFS Army. If you like it free and you want that more free content, click like, click subscribe, comment below, because it all goes a long way to keeping this stuff free. But, you know, I've come to the conclusion that I really think that the best strategy is to play the elite running backs, play the cheap quarterbacks, and to punt some of these wide receivers, at least one, right? We saw last week that a lot of the elite wide receivers made it back into the nuts, but that's not going to be something that I think we continue to see here the rest of the year. So speaking of cheaper quarterbacks, right? I love me some Jordan Love this week. Jordan Love's the guy that we've talked about a bunch of times in this podcast before. He has massive upside in this spot against the 49ers defense that is not as good as they have been in years past. You stack him up with Romeo Doubs, who's a mega cheap and has that upside, or you just play it safe and go Jaden Reed or Tucker Kraft or both, right? I actually love this game overall. It's the highest total on the Draftkings slate. It is going to be, I think, a very, very good game, and I expect Jordan Love to have a productive 20-plus point day. As we kind of scroll down here, we're talking about running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be one of the chalkier RBs this week, but I'm going with his backfield partner, David Montgomery, 6,700 DK, only 6.5% owned. There's more than enough to go around in this offense, and at some point, we're going to get a Montgomery game. Right? We're going to get a Montgomery game. It's going to happen where he gets like those 3 TDs. I mean, timeout. I should say it's going to happen on like Thanksgiving. Actually, no, what would be very Lion-esque would be if like Craig Reynolds had 3 touchdowns on Thanksgiving. I'm just still so burned about LeGarrette Blount scoring 3 for them. I don't even know, like 7 years ago. So yeah, but I do think that he is going to get a couple of short touchdowns here. I think this is good leverage. We call it correlated leverage, right? Where if the Gibbs chalk fails, it's likely that David Montgomery smashes. So love Monty here. Gibbs is a good play. Obviously, we're just kind of playing the percentages here. And that's what you have to do in GPPs, right? When you are trying to take something down, you got to zig when everybody else zags. So speaking of zigging when everybody else is zagging, I know you guys saw my off-centered picture to Tommy DeVito earlier. Kind of love the New York Giants offense as a whole here against the Bucs. Malik Neighbors is going to benefit from DeVito being under center, who is in his career been a fairly proficient passer. He's been good about not turning the ball over. We're not going to see him throw 30 times here, but you know, the majority of them are going to be to Malik Neighbors, or at least like the high fantasy scoring percentage or the high fantasy potential, right? Passes are going to go to Malik Neighbors. Neighbors is an absolute monster. He's uncoverable. If he was anywhere else in the league right now, we'd be talking about him like he's Justin Jefferson. That is how good Malik Neighbors is. Unfortunately, he's just had Danny Dimes. Good guy, throwing in the ball for 11 weeks here. He missed a couple, obviously, with concussions. But Tommy DeVito, I think, is a weird to say, an upgrade in the passing game from Daniel Jones. So we should see Neighbors have a good week here at fairly low ownership. And I get that I was just talking about cheap wide receivers, but I don't mind paying up for a stud like Neighbors in that spot. So now here's the cheapie Devon Belly for the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix is trending towards being fairly chalky, and none of his wide receivers are outside of Cortland Sutton, who's getting a little bit of ownership, but Belly's getting some decent usage here. The Raiders are not great. The target share is good. He's got TD upside. I think he needs the touchdown to get into the nuts, but at 5,500, I'm intrigued by really any of the Denver Broncos receivers. But he's the one that piques my interest the most. Speaking of wide receivers, George Kittle is listed as a tight end, but he is really like a wide receiver 1 or 2, and is only 6,000. I get that. I hate paying up for tight end, but everyone's going to pay up for Bowers, expecting another spike week. And I'm just going to keep hammering guys like George Kittle, who every single week are putting up 18 to 20 DraftKings points. There's my boy Bobby Wow, who wrote those showdown notes for tonight, crushing it with his Millie win a couple of years ago. Mike Evans, hey, maybe he'll play this week. We'll see. I talked about my boy Tommy DeVito. Love a cheap QB, 6,000, doesn't need to do much. He was fairly productive in his starts. I just think this makes too much sense. You pair him with Neighbors, you can play whoever you want, right? Including a guy who I'm going to talk about here in a second, but I'm not going to overthink this, right? You have to have these guys in your pool. If you're building 150 lineups, yeah, sure. A Lamar Jackson or a Patrick Mahomes or whatever could smash. But if Tommy DeVito throws for 250 and 2 TDs, he's the nuts QB. Right? That's just the way it is. All right. That's the way the math is going to math. Oh my gosh. I'm talking and half my face is not even in the screen. Should be paying attention to things like that. Not very professional. Speaking of not very professional, Will Levis, Tennessee Titans quarterback. He's looked okay. All right. There's some times that you're like, what in the world are you doing out there? But then there's some times where he throws the ball and you're like, that's why you were a high draft pick. That's why they're keeping you in at QB. All right. He looks like a legitimate starter, right? He throws some bombs and from some dots. He's decent. They look decent against the Vikings last week. I know I'm a Vikings fan, and I think their defense is probably better than we give them credit for, but they've looked pretty terrible at times so far. So, but yeah, even Cooper Rush managed to throw a little bit against the Houston Texans earlier this week in that Monday night game. Levis and Ridley is going to be your highest projected pairing, but don't sleep on your guy Nick Westbrook-Akine, who smashed last week too. Or you could even go like a Shiga Okonkwo. Levis throws him those little dump offs all the time, so I don't hate that either. But yeah, I think Will Levis is an intriguing GPP pick, and he's only going to be 2% owned. 6,700 is only 700 more than Tommy DeVito, and he brings some potentially rushing upside. You obviously have the multiple pick, multiple fumble type game that is possible with him, but it makes sense, and you can fit some studs like Saquon Barkley. I get that 10K. We are talking peak CMC sort of ownership or sort of pricing here, but 3% owned is absolutely bonkers. I get that by the time that we get to it on Sunday afternoon, he's going to be more owned than 3%, but Saquon is putting up that sort of volume and fantasy production right now. He's getting tons of usage, passing game, running game. He's a 3 touchdown guy every time he's on the field. Right. And you know what? He might get 3 touchdowns and jump over somebody backwards and do a backflip into the end zone this week. Literally, who knows with this guy? He's been so good. I don't see him under 20 points unless he gets hurt. So, 2x at 10K, you just sort of, especially if you're playing a cheap QB, I think that Saquon's just a lock button. All right. Cheapy wide receiver with some upside, Demario Douglas. This offense has looked productive the last couple of weeks with Drake May slinging it out there. Maybe the next Tom Brady. I don't want to go that far, but he's looked okay through a couple of weeks. Douglas has been good. 7 targets, averaging 7 targets over his last 3 games. Yardage just ticked up week after week. It's trending in the right direction. I get the Dolphins are a tough matchup on the road, but the Pats are going to be throwing because they're likely going to be down. So I think that Demario Douglas is the guy who's going to see the most of that. Again, like I talked about with the cheapies, they need a TD. You need to get that variance, but the potential is there. Finally, the last guy in the article this week is Sammy Laporta. Love me some Sam Laporta. It's just going to work at some point, right? This offense is too good. They get everybody involved, and at some point, Laporta is going to pop off, right? We've seen him have 2 good games out of his last 3, coming off an ACA joint injury where he missed last week, but he's going to play here. And he can't, it's not like he took that big of a step back as a sophomore. right? It's just everybody else is getting touches. So I get that I talked about Monty. I think you could like go real contrarian and go Monty Laporta in the same lineup. I don't hate that. And just hope you suck up all the touchdowns there. But Laporta has a double dip touchdown game coming at some point, right? I don't think he's ever going to be like the 100-yard guy, especially with Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown producing like they are. But I think 80 and a 2-touchdown game is not out of the realm of possibilities. And if he does that, he's your nuts tight end. So that is what I got for you all. I hope that you guys have a fantastic week. Use that code UpNorth, gets 10% off. Be on the wall of champions like my boy Hall D or Advantage. Like, look at all these guys winning. I get that some of these are older. If you are curious, just check out the DFS Army Twitter page. They are posting those winning lineups all the time. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, please like, subscribe if you want to keep this free, and have a fantastic week 12.